This is the story with this series. So I decided to go in a very different direction last time, where we were picking lots of short texts that all had one theme, because basically that was the only one theme I felt strongly enough about to do that for. So I was looking for something of a slightly different topic. I decided to pick a straight hashkafa book. Um, the classics are all written in the days of the Rishonim. So I had thought that whatever the hashkafa book was that we would do, it would be something that we can have discussions about how to relate them to our emuna. For example, we're going to see here in Derashos haRan, he's going to open up with a discussion of form and substance and the four elements and how they combine. And these are all things that were very pressing in their era when science meant Aristotle, and his main competitor was Plato, and most of the hashkafas were based on answering the questions they raised. Um, we live in a different era with a different set of questions. So I wanted a text that we could actually like bring over that has a certain amount of relatability. I also wanted a text that was um, somewhat more in line with hashkafas that are popular nowadays. So the Ran is from Girona, which would probably mean to somebody who knows the history of these things. Not a subject they actually learn in school, so I don't know who does. Um, you would think the Ramban, and therefore you'd be thinking a little mysticism, Kabbalah, whatever you call the you know, Kabbalah before the Zohar was publicized. Um, but the Ran actually, in more than one place, takes the Ramban to test that. See, he's not like dealing with a Rambam, a Ralbag, and Ibn Ezra, who are these very harsh Aristotelians who maybe push the Torah to very, very, very rationalist directions. But he's also not somebody who wants to be spending most of his time analyzing Kabbalah either. And being somewhere closer to the middle made him a an interesting Rishon to pick. The other thing is that Iran is very fundamental to halacha. I don't know how many people, though, actually know what he believes hashkafically. Was the second reason why I thought it was interesting to pick, and the third one is that they're Derashos. So everything starts with Chumash, with he's starting with Tanakh, he's working with the Gemara, but he keeps on returning to Tanakh. It's very much a Drasha style, which is a different style and also gives a different anchor to what you're learning than a book of Hashkafa that's written to be about Hashkafa. So that was the reason why we went Rosh Hashanah. Um, the That's the story. That's where we are, and that may be all the preamble. I'm missing a piece of preamble. Maybe we'll just save it for next week. The Ron lives. Just to give you a sense of time, uh, the Ramban was already gone for 200 years. The Ron is a later Rishon than that. He's not so late that he's staring down the gun of the expulsion from Spain, but he's later than the Rishonim that we usually discuss when we discuss Hashkafa, um, and he draws for them, which is another nice plus. So Derashos haRan, the first drasha starts with where everybody's first drasha starts, the first pasuk of the Torah. So let me. Oh, for those who are new, I should point out. I should tell you, I have three screens in front of me. The camera is above the laptop screen, so it's the smallest of the three, which means that when there are times I'm not making eye contact with the camera because your face is not under the camera. Please do not take that as an offense. It's just the logistics of where everybody's picture lays out. And frankly, if everybody's going to leave their cameras off, that's not a particularly, turning my face to make eye contact isn't really going to happen. So the thing, though, remember, and this is what I opened with, but a few people joined in the last, whatever, after the first sentence. I don't really believe that there's that much value in studying the Hashkafa the Rishonim if we leave it in the terms they left it in.
Just a little check on the wiki. It's just the Ran is 100 years after Ramban, not 200.
Okay.
Oh,
Is it?
Okay, fine.
It died like 1376 in the Ramban in 1270, so it's 100.
Okay, yeah. It's really just 100 years. Thank you. But back to this. I appreciate that. So back to the text that we're looking at. So here's an example of what I mean. Until the Ramchal, it was generally accepted that there are lots of events that happen that are not due to Hashgacha Pratis. And this is something that we've discussed on Avoda a lot of time, was when did this idea of universal Hashgacha Pratis arise? To the extent that nowadays many people, or most people in the community believe that it's an essential of the faith, that everything that happens with divine intervention. And that's simply not what most Rishonim believed. You have Rishonim who believe that everything that happened to a person happens with divine intervention, but most of them didn't even believe that. It's much more common for a Rishon to tell you that divine providence is earned. For example, or there are conflicting issues like divine providence versus free will, which we have from the Arachayim discussing why they threw Yosef into a well, because if they would have killed him directly, then they wouldn't know that God actually wanted him dead. It could be that it was their free will. And if they give more room for God to act, then it's hashgacha. You have the Rambam talking about that hashgacha is proportional with how well a person knows HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that punishment is being abandoned to teva, abandoned to nature, so that there is a divine hand in being subject to nature, but not everything that happens to every human being is hashgacha pratis. And then you get to the Ramchal, and the Ramchal starts with this idea that everything is, and you get to the Baal Shem Tov and the Gra, and this becomes like pretty central to Yiddishkeit today. I like to think, because it has a certain beauty, it has truthiness. Hopefully, it has truth. That there wasn't actually a change in philosophy that abruptly happened. The thing what happened was Kant and humanism and the Renaissance and this shift in topic of what philosophy discusses. So to the Rambam, the question is nature some hypostasis, some created thing that could be given control over a person? And so you get into, God versus another intellect, maybe an angelic intellect, that is a law of nature, that is running the show, as opposed to God. And it's all about metaphysics. In today's philosophies, we're not obsessed with metaphysics. We're obsessed with how to live in the world. Right? This is when you start getting to get content from context existentialism and postmodernism. And we're looking at the world very much from the perspective of who we are, of human beings. And now hashgacha is not a metaphysical question. It's a question of, how do I respond when something bad happens or something good happens? Or how much effort should I be putting in? The whole question of hashgacha versus ishtadlus now becomes um, the central theme in discussing hashgacha pratis. So I don't really think that it became a difference between a change in philosophy where we used to believe hashgacha pratis was not total, and now we believe it is total. I think the word changed meaning because the Rishonim are talking about some metaphysical entity that's going to handle your fate other than a god. And we're talking about whether or not we treat something that happened to us as definitely caused by the Ribono Shel Olam. And those are different questions, and therefore it's fair for them to have different answers, even within the same belief system. Now, that's a pretty drastic example, but that is the kind of thing I'd like to bring to these discussions, and why I chose the subtitle of Medieval Philosophy and Contemporary Emunah. Because there's I think where we're going to need to figure out how to take these ideas and actually apply them to our own worldviews or use them as foils because we can't bring them into our own worldviews. As I said, I picked the Ran because I don't think that there is as much we cannot use. But no two people are going to be happy with exactly the same view of the world. So there'll be things to pick and choose among. But again, I try to pick a Rishon that's not going to be like, oh, we can't believe that, we can't believe that, and that was based on physics that we don't believe in anymore, and that kind of thing. And that was the big piece of preamble that I was so upset I didn't remember when I was ready to move on. Any thoughts, comments before we read the first line? If you're shaking your head no and you don't have your camera on, that doesn't really tell me much. Okay, so let's look at the first two psukim. Breishis bara Elokim es hashamayim ves haaretz v'haaretz ha'isasov v'vohu v'choshech al pnei tehom v'ruach Elokim arachafetz al pnei hamoyim. So those are the two psukim that he's going to write this drasha about, right? This is so the first thing I want to point out is the Ramban says that these two psukim come before the 6 days. So one way of reading them is that they're an overview. First, Hashem created the heaven and the earth, and then it tells you, well, this is how he did it. On day 1, Hashem created light. On day 2, and so on. The Ramban's approach is that first Hashem created substance, which he calls huli, which is hyl or hul in Greek. It's just a Greek word. It means chomer, substance. The theory of form and substance is called hylomorphism, which means substance, and morph is a form. So that's the concept of hylo.
I always wondered what that hylo was when it showed up in like
it means chomer.
In the Mishnah Torah.
Okay, it means chomer, and morph means tzura. So if you're used to seeing it in Hashkafas farm, that is chomer and tzura. Chomer tends to have connotations of physics and physical existence. Tzura often is more related to tzura, aside from being form in the sense of a shape. There's also properties like hardness, softness. A sound could have a tzura, like its pitch and its tone, and the fact that I sound kind of nasal. That's tzura. Tzura is also, though, because there's a direct link between form and purpose. So tzura ends up being symbolic of things like the soul being the tzura, and chomer is more related to the body, and these kinds of ideas end up also coloring hylomorphism. But we're just going to deal with literal chomer and literal tzura, meaning physical objects and their properties. So the mass, the substance of the object, and then all the properties that it has above it. And the Ramban and the Ran, we're going to see, also takes this approach that these psukim start with discussing creation, bria, meaning creation ex nihilo, out of nothing, of this substance. So, kol ha-mefarshim amitiyim, all true Scotsmen, all true explainers, expositors, hiskimu b'perush elu haksuvim, agree on how to explain these verses. Shekon son lamar ki Breishis habriya nivra chomer mishutaf shekavanasam. That was pretty bad. Their intent is to say that at the beginning of creation was created chomer. That's the same hayal that we were talking about with as that the Ramban discusses on this pasuk. Hashem created substance. Mishutaf l'chol ma tachas gagal hayareach. That is in common for everything that's under the sphere of the moon. Galgal, by the way, is what we would nowadays call an orbit. It's not the moon. It's a transparent sphere that spins around the earth that the moon is embedded in. So nowadays, that's like the math of gravity and orbits, but in their worldview, it was a physical object. According to the Rambam, it was an intellect. It is an intellect, and it gives the orbit of the moon. Things don't continue moving unless there's some intellect with intent continually adding impetus to the object. So the moon, therefore, in order to orbit, there has to be an intellect there keeping it spinning forever. When you push a little car on a carpet, a toy car on a carpet, it runs for a few feet and then stops. So never mind momentum, never mind friction. These ideas didn't exist yet. In their world, that meant that you put in a little impetus, the impetus is used up, you have to put in more impetus to get it to continue to move. So the Yareach must have had a galgal, some kind of transparent intellectual thing that kept on keeping it spinning around the earth. But anyway, back to this. Kavanasam Lomar, the intent of these two psukim is to tell you, Ki Breishis habriya, at the beginning of creation, Nivra chomer meshutav b'chol ma tachas galgal hireach. God created the substance for everything that is under the orbit of the moon. The im ktsasam, if some of them savru, had the svara, had the idea, shakavana ba'amro eser shemaim v'esa aretz, when the pasuk says eser shemaim v'esa aretz, chayu shtei chomer nivdalim. Why are they listed separately? Because there's two different kinds of chomer, of substance. Shem chomer hashemayim v'chomer haaretz. That the heaven is made out of a different kind of substance than the earth. Kulam hiskimu shazal pasuk hasheni kolol arba yisodos shehem avos v'chol ma shetachas galgal hayireach. Kulam hiskimu, they all agree that the second pasuk includes the four elements, which are the parents, the give rise to everything that is under this orbit of the moon, and that is Aish, fire, which is implied near Asher Nirmaz Milas Choshech, which is implied by the word darkness. Or Hanirmaz, that shouldn't be, or that should be wind. Air, sorry, Va'avir, Hanirmaz B'milas V'ruach Elokim. So it's hinted at by the fact that Hashem's spirit is called Ruach, a wind. So that's air. Ba'mayim, water, Alfar, Nichlalim B'milas Tahom. They're both subsumed by the word Tahom. Right? The deep waters imply there's a deep and there's a waters. So you have an earth and you have water. Vamnan. Chayva Chachma Lokis Liya Chomer Echad Meshutaf L'chol Asher Tachas Galgal HaYireach. Divine wisdom demanded that there only be one substance for everything under the moon. Leos haratzon me'ito, that it was the will before him. Lahamshech teva havaya, to give, the property of existence, the nature of existence. Kfiyev sharus. Lo ratza livra dvarim rabim. Hashem didn't want to create needlessly. Sounds kind of like Occam's razor, right? The theory that posits the fewer existences is most likely correct, right? So it's the same thing here. Hashem didn't create needlessly. So lo ratza livro dvarim rabim yishmam. He didn't want to create out of nothing many things. Achar sheish be'efsharei chomer echad lichlo kulam. Once it's possible for everything to have a single kind of substance. So chomer, there's only one chomer. The elements are four different tsuros that are given to the same chomer. Right, four different forms to the same underlying substance. Lezeh im nitzarich lahodos lios chomer shamayim chomer echad. If we have to agree that the substance that heaven is made out of is a different substance, hayamasar shatzura hagogalis lo hayala efsharus lachol b'chomer oretz. It would be impossible that the spheres could be, the form of the sphere could be given to the stuff that the world is made out of. So the only way that Es HaShemayim V'Es HaAretz would mean that there are two substances would be if you actually needed two substances, and that the spheres couldn't be made out of earthly substance. Aval echad shelchol nimtza megagal yirechol lamala yesh litzurasam efsharas lachol b'chomer zeh. And if it were possible that they could be made out of this substance, there would be two things created in the lower universe out of nothing, for no point. But it would have been enough just to create out of nothing what is necessary, what must exist. So what he says here about substances is Hashem created substance that's bria, that's out of nothing. Therefore, Hashem did a minimum because it's inherently miraculous and violates the whole concept of laws of nature. And therefore, if the spheres are made out of a different substance, it has to be because they can't, their form can't be given to our substance. But if not, not. And he doesn't take side. That's all he's going to say about the topic of heavenly substance. But notice also, he says, and I put this on a side note here, he's outlining two steps. Breishis paralokim eseshmaim v'aretz, that's the creation of substance. And therefore, it could be two substances because eseshmaim v'aretz. That's hinting now that the lower substance was given multiple forms. And then there are four forms. The four elements are implied by each of the things that claim existence already. Choshech implies that there's a light to be dark from. You can't have an absence of light until there's light. So that's fire. Tahom is earth and water, because you have the water and you have the deeps that they are filled into. And Ruach Elokim is air, because there's a spiritual wind that implies that there's a physical wind. So that's where he gets to the four elements. There will be a third step, but we'll see if we get. I hinted it already in the next paragraph. Any thoughts, observations? This stuff is too far from practical yet.
I have a question I was wondering about. In the conception of the structure of the universe that he's working with,
Yeah.
what or how much is there below the orb of the moon? Like if there's both Shamayim va'aretz there, like how much Shamayim is there, and like what kind of Shamayim? Um,
Okay, so that's a good question. I'll tell you what I think, but let me give room for somebody else. Okay, nobody answered while I opened my soda, so I'll leap in. Um, here, Haya Masar, Shatura Hagagalis, Lo Yellow Efshers Lechol Bechomer Aretz. So to me, it seems that he's talking about the spheres. And that's why I took such a long detour into what is a Galgal. Because to me, it seems he's saying if you need a Chomer Hashemayim, a heavenly stuff, right? It is only because the Galgalim can't be, the form of the Galgalim can't be given to fit to earthly stuff. So to me, it seems to be his Shemayim is not metaphysical things, although they may be because if they're intellects, they may be metaphysical. So they're not outside of what we now call the universe, right? They are the spheres within the universe. That's what just from the highlighted text, that was what I deduced. And
okay.
I'm not that it's I'm reading between the lines and two lines. So if if somebody else has a you know struck differently, speak up now. Okay. The ode. Now this is really where he starts getting into the main topic of the next several pages. She'ain suffake. There's no doubt. Shezah that this existence, kulo hatachton hayelitzarech adam bishvilo. Oh, Shazam Mitzios Kulo Atachton, Yelitarecha Adam Bishvilo. Everything in the lower terrestrial creation, everything that exists is for people. The Ramban, the Ran says ain't suffix. The Rambam says no. The Rambam says you can't know why God created anything. It's hubris of man to think that everything exists for man. We don't know the purpose of everything existing, and no, everything does not exist for people. So it seems very incontrovertible. I mean, uncontroversial. We tend to think of the universe as a forum for human action, and everything else exists, for for us to have a universe to act in. But the Rambam doesn't actually hold that. The Ran takes it for granted, and frankly, I would have also. But Tzarech Hagadol lo, and his great need by him, who mizono. What is the greatest need that a person has for physical objects? It's food. Well, breathing, but both of them. Asher lokeach meitam, which he takes from them. Ad shechomer ha'adam karov lios nilkach me'chomer ma'achirim. So the substance of that a person is made out of has to be the related, connected to all of the substances of everything else. Smechim, whether it's plants or balechaim or animals, sharmeshiva tam b'chosav hativius etzem gufo, because you bring them into your body through natural processes. So you can't be made of different stuff than the world around us. At least our bodies can't. I mean, I could theoretically make an argument that maybe our minds are made out of heavenly stuff, especially if heavenly stuff means the stuff the spheres are made out of. And the spheres were only posited by Aristotle because He needed intellects to keep the planets to continually moving and the stars moving around planets. And the stars, by the way, is one galgal. They all move together. So there's only one sphere, and all the stars are embedded in one sphere. But either way, they're intellects. So it is possible that our mind is made out of the heavenly stuff. But he's talking about the body. He's talking about the fact that the body has to be made out of the same stuff as the things we eat and the air we breathe, or else we couldn't bring them into the body and they'd be useless to us. Or basically, you are what you eat. And this is only possible because of their common relationship of substance. If they weren't of the same substance, it would have been a block, a power that stops them. Ad Oh, sorry. Okay, let's stop where I was. So until the sages agreed, it's impossible that a single element, etzem gufo im hiyoso chelak min chalkav, yan hiyoso cholek alav b'pshitus varakava. A simple element cannot be brought in. It's etzem, its selfness can't be brought in to be part of an object. He's dealing with the problem that an element is an individual thing and a compound is a compound. And you can't take, there's already a problem with breaking up the element to make a compound. Compound's the wrong word. To make compound is the right word. No, the compound, like in chemistry, right? The element loses its nature to become part of the compound. This is already a problem once you deal with elements. And if that's true with two elements made from the same stuff, how much more so if they didn't have the same stuff in common? Therefore, it has to be that everything we interact with has to be from a single chomer. It would not participate with each other. And if so, you and him some kula mechomer acher, everything would be out of a different stuff. They would be they would be in opposition to him and they wouldn't be able to be of any use. They wouldn't be any benefit. Unfit. Who sam kol ma sheyishtatef im ha'adam asher hu ha'olam ha'tachton miklalo chomer echad. Therefore, everything in this world had to be made of a single chomer, because in order to serve man, it had to be something we can work with, we can make compounds with. Va'amnam hayos ha'olam ha'elyon chomer echad, and even if the upper world is a different substance, ain hisnagdos el adam, that doesn't provide a problem for people. We don't eat stars. Mitzad chomro, rak mitzad turaso. We don't have anything in common with planets in terms of substance. We might have something in common in terms of tzura, in terms of form. Bein litzarech hafoch. And form, ein litzura hafoch. Form doesn't transform. By the way, notice the word transform. Another word with the word form in it is to inform, because when you understand something, its form resides in your head, right? If you think about a table, the form of a table sits there in your head, so you get informed. But here it's transform. A form cannot transform. If you turn a tree into a table, you've changed the substance, right? But the form of the tree is the form of a tree, and the form of a table is the form of a table. You can't change the form of a given table. You just stop having it. It stops being a table. A tree, the wood of a tree could take other forms. The tree itself can't take other forms. It just stops being a tree. It starts being something else. So that's ein letzura hafoch, because the tzura is a given state. If you change state, then you're changing from tzura to tzura. The tzura itself doesn't change. Did that make sense? I'm belaboring the point because I don't really know how to word it. So this is really what I'm introducing here now, and I thought I did it later in my side notes. He's talking about step 3 here, combining the elements. So there's really 3 steps to creation. The first pasuk is making chomer. The second pasuk is turning it into elements. And now the third pasuk is how the various elements combine in order to make, objects or things people could use and people. So I wanted to detour a little. This is not in the Ran. This is something I learned from the Maharal. I'm going to bring over the Maharal, which I put in tiny font on the side. So there's a famous Mishnah in Chagiga, in Darshan Barayos B'Shlosha. We don't teach about Arayos in the 3 students. Below b'masa Breishis b'shnayim, and you don't teach masa Breishis to 2 students. Below b'masa cover v'yochid, and you don't teach masa merkava at all, at least not explicitly. Maral, in the first introduction to Geviras Hashem, explains what each of these things are in the Mishnah. Perish elu shlosh dvarim. Harishon, she'Hashem yisbarach, b'tziuso moved on mikol nimtzain veinlo hishtatfus imahim. So Masa Merkava is about how unlike everything else Hashem is. Hasheni shehu yisbarach himtzi shar hanimtzaim. Masa Bereshis is the act of creation. Just what the words mean. Hashlishi shehem mesudarimi oso b'seder shalehem. And the third thing, arayos, literally in the Mishnah, you would think is just, you don't discuss sex in public. It's just improper, right? It's something you should be teaching one-on-one, or one to at most 2 students. He says, no, arayos is actually symbolic of the entire concept of combination. So the 3 things that the Mishnah says you shouldn't be teaching in public because they're esoteric are actually the 3 steps that the Ran is discussing for creation. There's the create. Well, it's not really. It's the second 2, right? First, Hashem makes substance. Then he what's it called? Then he turns it into elements. But this idea of arayos is that there's a mystical element, an esoteric element to how things combine and recombine. So the Ran here, I guess the parallel is not as close as I thought it was when I got all enamored of it. But the Ran here is discussing that third thing, the combining and recombining. And as I said when we started this paragraph, it is the this discussion of how things combine is the majority of the drasha. We okay before we add another layer on top? Observations, questions, explorations to the meaning of the universe? No?
Wait, so has he said anything yet about how you go from the Homer to the to the four elements?
He doesn't, but that was physics in their day. That the four elements were four basic forms that substance comes in.
Gotcha.
And all
Okay.
the other forms are combinations of those forms.
Gotcha. So the four elements are already a combination of Homer with the different surahs.
Well, right. The elements are the Homer assuming one of four surahs.
Got it.
That's why I called it step 2. So step 1 was just the creation of Homer with no surah, which is a concept we can't even picture. Something exists but has no attribute. Just existence itself. The second, like mass without particles. Like in today's physics. It just doesn't, you can't picture what that means, right? The second one is the elements, and the third one is now we're discussing how the elements combine and recombine. And he's saying that everything that a human can touch and manipulate has to be of the same substance as a person, and also has to be of the same elements as a person. In the extreme case, we couldn't bring them into our bodies when we eat them if they were made out of a different chomer. And as it is, the different combinations of elements require changing suros too, and that's not so simple. So an object changes suros, but its surah does not change. That's kind of what that last sentence I was trying to figure out a nice way to say. Okay. Vihine, Hodiyasanu Torah. The Torah let us know. Shemei elu hanivraim hachaserim. These defective creations. Shein betachlis hachisaron kol echad mitzad atzmo. That each one in itself is defective. In other words, there's no value to pure fire. There's no value to pure air. There's no value to pure earth. And there's no value to pure water. Like just existence as they are in themselves have no point. From Yachad, when you bring them together, and this is why I titled the paragraph, The Value of Compounds. When you bring them together, Yishchad Shumehem or Kavim Rabim, you get all these different compounds. Bale Mala that have value. Rabbe Ashlemos, and they have perfections. He ain suffik she'elu hanivraim harishonim asher hem chelkei kol havaya chaserim me'od, that these original created things, that their virtues, their parts are so lacking. Ad shelo chalu behem askulos hanimtzaim b'domim hamurkav mehem. They don't even have the value of inanimate objects that are compounds of them. Like a rock has more value than the pure element of earth. Ain Sarich Lomar, or dirt, even though we also call it earth, has more value than the pure element earth. Ain Sarich Lomar Segulas Hatzomeach V'Chayva Adam. All the more so the higher levels of existence of plant, animal, and person. We know about these 4 levels of existence. So because form is associated with soul, the form of an inanimate object is really just the form of an inanimate object. But the form of a plant also gives it the ability to grow. So it starts having elements is a confusing word. It starts having attributes that we would associate with life and with soulness. More so with animals, with chai, and even more so, and by animals I mean all, bugs, all birds, all the living creatures, the all fauna as opposed to flora, and Adam and person being all the more so. So each of these levels get you further from what we think of it when we say form, and closer to what we think of when we say soul. But it's just a spectrum of existence with four basic categories of level. So there's the domain, Tzomeh, Chai, and Medaber is the way it's usually put. He puts it Adam. Medaber speaking, because that's an essential unique attribute of people is that we can speak. Ke'ein min hamechuyav shaklal asher yimatzeh michalakim gruim. There is nothing compelling that something that a whole made of inferior parts, bo also a chisaron, that the lack, that the inferiority has to stay with it. Asher b'chaluf b'shutav. Where are we? Okay, asher chaluf b'shutav, when it, right, the lack that exists when there's nothing saying that the lack that an element has, that a component has to continue to exist once it gives up being a component, being an individual. Elamitzadi yuso klal umorkov, once it becomes part of the whole and part of the compound, imatsubo shlemos, it has a certain kind of perfection, with to'alos and purpose, enam bipshuto upratav. So a whole could be has more value than the parts. He may be saying the whole is more than the sum of the parts, but he's definitely saying that the part, a piece, has more value being part of a whole than it has being a piece, being an individual. And this truth that nature has impressed upon us, this is what Chazal, he says, Rabbeinu Nissim, it's the same thing as Chachmeinu Nissim. We're talking about the Rabbanim of the Mishnah Gemara, maybe the earlier Gonim. B'shevcho marao shel tzibur, when they talk about the praises and the awe-inspiringness of a congregation. Hacha omru la'olam tehi emas tzibur alecha. Always have a fear of the congregation upon you. So now he takes a leap, not a conceptual leap, a leap in topic. He's saying that what we just saw about the value of an individual versus a component versus the value of a compound is also true of a person and a community. A community is greater than the individuals. So whether or not there's synergy when it comes to objects, there's synergy when it comes to community. What I noted on the side is that he's making a very modern statement, because in his day, I mean, even through to the early, most of the 20th century, science was, how do you understand something? You break it down into the parts. If you understand how the parts work, you figured it out, right? Like the physicists broke things down into vectors of force. There are four forces. There's n particles. There are n atoms. If we understand the electron, the proton, the neutron, then we'd understand the atom. If we understand quarks, we'd understand the electron, proton, and neutron. If we understand the photon, we'd understand how the electron works, right? And we're just going to smaller and smaller pieces. And if we focusing on understanding how each piece works, we'd understand the whole. He's saying, first of all, overtly in the text, he's saying that there's value to how the parts are combined. But also covertly in this jumpa topic, he's saying that the process of combining has its own rules that hold whether we're talking about combining elements or combining people. It's really, I mean, and this field became, it had a couple of blips in the 60s, but it became a big thing in the 1990s of emergent properties. And chaos theory is a piece of that as well, where chaos theory can have the same math for when a system goes from stable to chaotic, whether we're talking about, weather patterns or the economy. Or we could do the math of networks, whether we're talking about how neurons in your brain connect or links between web pages. And this kind of emergent property study, he's just taking for granted here. What this truth that we just learned with respect to elements, that the compound is worth more than the element, is also true of a community, that a community has value. A person as part of a community has more value than a person as standing alone. And the community has a certain aima to it, right? Has a certain praiseworthiness and aima to it that you don't get with individuals. Anyone not buy that? Because it does rub against the American ethic of the self-made man and how great it is to not be, an autonomy, and halacha in general, Torah in general, kind of runs against that whole thing. Kol Yisrael are from Zeh B'Zeh. You don't say, mind your own business. It's actually halachically wrong to say mind your own business, right? We just had, what was it, 6 months of learning about the interconnectedness of people, right? So this is kind of going along with that. Oh, I don't want to say it's part of the relationship thing, but he's saying that there is a value to being a person in a community has value that they do not have standing as an individual on their own. Ad matzinu shenenash adon hanavim, till we find that the greatest of the Navim was punished about this. Bamro, when he said, Shimu Nahamorim, listen now, you rebels. When Moshe hits the rock, and right before Moshe hits the rock, he says, listen now, you rebels, demanded all this world, right? He gets punished for saying this, for separating himself, and Bafal Pisha Kol Echad Mitzad Pratiuso, Lo Hayaro, even though each person alone, standing alone, did not deserve such a statement. Ramrina, such a epithet of Morim. Ramrin Beperakama. Okay, let's stop here because this quote from Kiddushin is going to take longer than 2 minutes, and I want this series to be hour long. Among the feedback I got last time was an hour and a half long was too long. So I'm going to do hour-long classes this time. We'll see how it goes. So that's where I want to stop. So really, this is the beginning of the topic I thought we would be discussing. And the idea of the simple and the compound, and the idea of the individual and the community. And what kinds of communities are healthy and what kind of communities are self-destructive. So that is where the majority of the Derashah goes, and not where we were before about the elements and the compounds. exit full screen. So, any thoughts, observations?
Before you close up, could you just speak out exactly what the Ran did with bringing in that pasuk of Shimona Hamorim? I just felt it.
Okay. Well, don't worry about it because I'm going to start at the beginning of the paragraph anyway next time. But no. But just to give you an idea, he is he's stating that you're a community of rebels. Even though a person who's thirsty saying I'm thirsty, where's the water, would not qualify for the title rebel. Once they form a community, they're a community of rebels. So the sum community is greater than the parts, the individual unhappy people, right? If people aren't happy and they need a complaint emotion to get their needs met, that's one thing. They form a community of people complaining, and now they're rebels. But again, we'll start with that piece again because next time I just wanted to get to the topic of remember I sold this year saying that we're going to be looking at least for the first few weeks about community and diversity. So I wanted to get enough past the 4 elements in creation that you actually saw that we were headed there. So I started the paragraph, but we'll start it. We'll chazer. We'll review it again.